Glenn Everett, master of machines. This episode we talk about the history of Holden, check out some spectacular examples of the brand, and then join me as I test drive two iconic models in the range. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more awesome content coming your way. We're at the Trafalgar Holden Museum in Victoria. I'm told there's some spectacular cars in here, so how about we go and take a look at some great Australian automotive history. Neil, it's fantastic to be here and thank you so much for having us. And it seems you're a very big fan of the Holden product. Can you tell us where your passion started with Holden?
From the time I bought my first one when I was nearly 18 years of age, and I've more or less always owned Holden ever since. I just love it.
So Neil, tell us about the museum. How did it all come about?
Well, I outgrew my old premises and this became available, and it very quickly became evident that we wanted to share what we had here and let everybody in Australia know all about the Holden and the history of Holden. Our kids deserve to know it, and our grandchildren and so on, and we're hoping that this will be here for many years to show people what Holden was all about.
And tell us what you know about the Holden history. It dates quite a long way back. It's not just all about the first Holden in Australia in the late 40s. It goes back a lot further than that, doesn't it?
The first Holden business was started in 1856. James came from England. He arrived in Australia at the age of 16, and he then went on to start a saddlery making business. They joined with a company called Frost and became carriage builders, Holden being the upholstery and leather work, and Frost being the carriages and buggy builders. Then they got into the 1900s where they started to make sidecars for Golding motorcycles, and then in about 1915 they bodied their first motor car, and away it went from there.
And even during the war effort, there was quite a lot of work done by Holden as a company too, wasn't there? Tell us about that.
Holden were bodying motor cars one day, and the next day they were effectively shut down and went straight into a war effort. They went from making a few isolated bits and pieces to becoming a major contributor for weapons during the war.
One thing I've noticed here in the museum too is white goods, refrigerators and all this type of thing that was actually being manufactured at General Motors even in the later years.
Yes, Holden were an extremely progressive and innovative group. They went on making fridges and washing machines and stoves, and the whole story is just amazing.
So it seems you have quite a wide variety of Holdens here.
We've got every model of chrome bumpers from the 48215, most of us know it as the FX, and we go through to HZ.
I notice you've also got one of the very, very rare 1946 prototypes here. I've heard there was a very small number made in the USA along with Australian engineers working with them over there, and there was potentially a couple made here in Australia as well, so very, very rare car.
It takes fairly much pride of place and everybody is interested in it. It's fantastic to have it here.
It was a very big deal back in the day, Australia's own car. Tell us what you know about that history.
General Motors sort of put together this Australian concept, and the FX, or the 48215, evolved from there. The whole history of this is just fantastic. But the thing that I love about it is back in the early days when somebody bought a new Holden, everybody in the district would front down to have a look at it and pore over it and generally drool and wonder why they couldn't afford one themselves. Back in those days, it was a 1.5 years average wage to buy a new Holden, which was one of the cheaper vehicles around.
And Neil, I noticed you've even got a ute room here. Now the ute was fairly unique to Australia, wasn't it?
The ute has been very much an integral part of Australian history, and especially in the farming community, Holdens did a fantastic job with the farm work over many, many years.
Neil, you've got a big variety of cars here, but I think it's pretty important we start with this 48215 here. Give us a rundown.
Well, this particular car is we purchased out of Western Australia. I've got a real soft spot for it because not only is it the first Holden ever made, but just the colour and everything about it really does something for me. I like all of my cars original, and I'm trying to keep them as original as we can possibly get them. And this particular one, I think, is a very good example of the 48215 or the FX as we know it. Yeah, and I just love it, yeah.
And what's it like to drive? I mean...
Oh, look, I class myself as a really good driver because I had to be, and a lot of guys of my age did have to be, because the cars we drove really were not very sophisticated and they really did take a lot of driving. So it's not a particularly good car to drive, but it's also a lot of fun as long as you can keep away from everybody else. No, we just love it, and as I say, the colour and everything about the old girl is really something to behold.
Let's just put things into perspective here. It's not until you see an old girl like this that you actually realise that these cars are 65 years old. This one here was found in a paddock on a farm, and she's a little bit worse for wear. Thank goodness we find examples like this that have been preserved and restored and kept to perfection. So how about we drive this baby and see what it's all about. Well, this is a very special moment for me. We're driving Australia's first car, one of the 48215s, also known here as the FX Holden. What an experience. I mean, think about this. Many years before this car was even designed and built, Holden as a company were actually bodying vehicles for General Motors in the US. It was cheaper for them to have cars bodied here because to import entire vehicles over, they had to pay a huge tariff. So they could never be competitive here in the Australian market. And during the Depression years, General Motors then decided to buy Holden out. We all know what happened from that point onwards. They then decided to build Australia's own car. In the early 40s, it all began. She was on the drawing board. And effectively, you can see that the car is very similar to a mid-40s Chevrolet. And it's like a shrunk down version, you can tell. It does share some styling cues from the Chevrolet. But this car's different. It's more compact. They used a little grey 6-cylinder engine. It was around 132 cubic inches. It was actually just under 2.2 litres in capacity in today's terminology. That's a tiny little engine. And it was said that this engine got up to 30 miles to the gallon. That is absolutely amazing back in 1948. This little grey motor was effectively used right up to 1963. The last model being the EJ Holden. That is absolutely amazing that they would run an engine for approximately 15 years in a model range. Incredible. So it did a really good job, the little grey. So how would I explain the performance of this little grey engine? It's adequate, it does the job. And fuel efficiency, amazing. The whole package with this car for the day was pretty impressive. It's interesting to see that the Australian market demanded a more compact car. Or whether they did demand it, I don't know. Maybe General Motors just decided that that was the way they were going to travel with these things. Everything in the US was big and long. So as you can imagine, these cars would have handled a lot better. And apparently most people in Australia, including businessmen and general public, were driving pre-war General Motors type vehicles or English cars. So as soon as they saw these babies on the market, they lined up to buy them. They went out the door like hotcakes. The Holden engineers, in conjunction with GM US, they had a mission, and that was to make this car as light as possible. And it was just over 1,000 kilograms in curb weight. The engine made about 60 horsepower. So she was no all guns blazing racing machine, but back then it did the job. Now another nickname that these 48215s had, they were known as the Humpy. And I'm told that it's got nothing to do with what used to happen in the back seat, but more so the shape of the car. The old 3-speed gearbox, she works like a dream. She's no close ratio example, but it does the job. Car accelerates well, shifts nice, She floats around a bit though. No sway bar on the front, so body roll is a bit of an issue. It was a long time before RTS, radial tuned suspension, came on the market for Holden in the late 70s, so as you can imagine, she's lagging behind in that technology department, but it wasn't about then, so it is what it is. For me, it's not about the road holding of this car or the fire-breathing performance. I am driving a piece of Australian history. Surprisingly, I've got to say, I feel quite at home in this car. The seating position, the seat's comfortable, the steering wheel's quite big. I almost feel like I'm driving a bus, but that's what all cars were like back then. But still, I do feel at home. The gauges are right in the centre. The car feels quite compact in the cabin. I really like this thing. I could get used to it. It is actually an enjoyable experience. You don't have to drive a 500 horsepower muscle car to have fun. You can enjoy an old classic like this. Or even better, still have both. That's what I reckon. I really can't think of Australia without the 48-215 Holden. Just wouldn't seem right. It's a turning point in Australia's automotive industry. 48-215 on a country Australian road. It's what it's all about. It's what it's all about. And here was an interesting turning point with Holden, the FE.
Yes, 1956 first came out just before the Olympic Games. It's only got 70-something thousand mile on it, and it is probably the nicest car in our collection to drive.
They're almost like a baby 55, 56 Chevy sort of style, aren't they?
You silhouette the two of them and you would be hard pressed to differentiate between the two of them. Magnificent looking motor car. My very first car was the FC, and I still think of all of the motor cars that Holden produced, the FC is the prettiest of a lot of them.
You can see why the even if you want to say the street machiners of this world have always been very fond of the FC because they are a very pretty looking car.
They are, absolutely. They just the extra chrome work really finishes them off beautifully, I think.
So Neil, we enter the 60s here.
Yep.
The FB and the EK.
1960, 1961. This particular vehicle is an exact replica or identical to my parents' first new Holden. And in fact, I was minding a Chev here for a friend of mine. And I brought Mum down not long after I purchased this, thinking that it would take her back a year or two. And I pulled my hanky out of my pocket all ready for the tier, and I said, "What do you think of that, Mum?" She looked at it and she said, "Yeah." She said, "But I do like that black one over there."
She liked the Chev?
She liked the Chev, and I think my mother's really a hoon after all, I'm not sure. But, this particular car is a local one. I bought it from a chap only a few mile up the road. It was actually his in-law's motor car, and got handed down to him, and a very good looking motor car, and yeah, it brings back a lot of memories for a lot of people.
And when it comes to low mileage, I believe this is the car, Neil.
This particular vehicle's got 7,800 miles on it or thereabouts. It is just a beautiful example of grey motors. But keep in mind, this was starting to become a bit of a problem because the grey motor hadn't been changed virtually since 48, and this was the very last model with a grey motor in it. But yeah, lovely to drive, and 7,000 miles on it, just fantastic.
Even the plastic on the seats, the whole car, it looks like it's just rolled off the showroom floor.
Terrific, isn't it?
And a game changer here with the EH.
Fantastic motor car, isn't it? 1964, the first of the red motors, upmarket with a 179 power behind it. They used to go very, very well, and they'd tow anything they like. Very square looking motor car, but still has fantastic appeal about it, doesn't it?
I remember my dad said when the EH first came out with the 179, his dad bought one. He said the first thing we did was jumped in it and took it street racing. We thought we had a big block Holden 60. Couldn't believe the power, the amazing power. And I suppose back then it would have been.
A massive jump from something like an EJ grey motor to a 179. We're talking, sort of 30% increase, aren't we? And it's, yeah, really sort of moved mountains.
And this one here, what sort of mileage are we talking on this car?
About 75,000 I think she's done.
So, which is still relatively low mileage.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to the EJ, it's high mileage, but still extremely low mileage.
Yeah, and if you have a look at the back seat, it's hardly ever been sat in. But a beautiful looking motor car, I think that's the thing that I love about them.
And another low mileage vehicle, this HD here.
This is probably my favourite. It's got 13,000 miles on it. And if you open the door and take a deep breath, you can smell the brand new motor car from back in 1965. It's fantastic. I know that it wasn't a terribly popular vehicle, but by gee, this is a lovely example of the HD from those days. It's fantastic.
I love the HD, and I particularly like the taillights on them too, because they've got that sort of like Chevelle type look about them, that GM look, haven't they? It's still the same engine lineup in the HD?
Same engine lineup, 149, 179. 2-speed automatic in these, which is a bit of a breakaway from the 3-speed hydramatics. They also came out in this model with an X2, which was a twin carb version of the HD, and yeah.
I think they had a unique header system on them
They
too,
did,
the exhaust.
yes, they did. Yeah, they were quite an interesting vehicle.
I can still hear those X2 carbs growling and snarling now. They had a great induction noise about them, didn't they?
They did.
And then we progressed to the HR.
HR, 1966, 186 engine, slightly bigger capacity. And unlike the HD, it was probably one of the most liked Holdens of its day. And it amazes me that there's so little change between the two vehicles, but no, lovely motor car, lovely to drive. Everything about these old cars is just terrific.
And Neil, yet another low mileage car, this HK Kingswood here.
Yep, 13,500 miles on it. It was a South Australian vehicle, and it's just a magnificent example of how the Kingwoods were presented in those days. No heater, no demister, stock standard Kingswood motor car with no accessories whatsoever.
The only optional extra is the old gentleman's hat on the parcel shelf.
Yes, that's the only optional extra on that particular vehicle, yeah. That's the previous owner's hat, and I think it would be bad luck to remove it, wouldn't it?
Peter, fantastic to talk to you here, mate, and I believe you're the owner of that awesome HK 327 Monaro behind us here. Tell us the story.
A fellow I used to work with years ago rang me up one day and said, there's a HK Holden advertised in a little country newspaper, $12,000 and a mobile number. So I thought, well, he suggested that it's probably a Monaro for that price, because a HK Kingswood or whatever wasn't bringing that sort of money 8 or 10 years ago sort of thing. I rang this number and I got this older chap on the phone. I said, $12,000 sounds a lot of money for a HK Holden. You know, what is it? He said, well, it's a 2-door Monaro. It's not just a normal HK Holden, which obviously it never had that in the ad. So, and then of course my next question was, what size motor's in this HK Holden? And he says, well, it's got the big one. And I'm thinking now, is that a 186 or a 161? And he said, no, he said the big one, the one they raced them with. Well, the eyeballs lit right up, and my wife and I couldn't get up there quick enough. And I got it for $10,000, and it needed nothing for a roadworthy. So I was very happy, and I've been offered a lot of money since, but I don't think there's a car out there that I'd want more than a HK Monaro.
The EH Holden, what a groundbreaking model this car was. And no wonder. The EH had an all-new engine platform, backed by a 3-speed manual trans and also a hydromatic transmission in auto, just like this one here. What a completely different car this one is to the FX to drive though. It's so well planted. The car feels low, it feels secure. Sure, not quite like a modern car with modern suspension, but a whole new quantum leap above the old 48 215. A big 179 red motor. In fact, that engine design dates back to something like 1948. Can you believe that? That's when it was on the drawing board. So it's not a new engine in design by any means, even for this year model. but streets ahead of the old grey, that's for sure. They even had a decent racing heritage too, with drivers like Brian Yogi Muir and Norm Beachy and the likes, and you're not going to believe this. Guess who else raced an EH in the day? None other than Dick Johnson. Yep, sorry Ford fans, Dick Johnson actually raced an EH. He even sported his famous number 17 on the door too. How's that? Unbelievable, isn't it? Now understandably, the EH Holden was actually one of the best all-time sellers for Holden. Awesome model with a huge following. Even today, they're one of the most sought-after Holden classic models. I'd have one myself. I'm very, very fond of them. I think they look tough, and they are tough. This hydromatic trans is unique though. It's not like your traditional style automatic transmissions with their more modern torque converters and what have we. This thing feels very direct in its drive, and the transmission sort of slides into gear. It doesn't just shift firmly, it sort of it slides into gear and chugs along. It's a really unique feeling. I don't know if I like it all that much, to be honest with you, but back in the day it was probably very groundbreaking. Newer trans are just so much firmer and so much more precise in their shift from that sort of late 60s, 70s period onwards. One way you could tell if you had the 179 version of the EH was the big checkered flag 179 badge on the boot lid. You could also get the EH in the 149 engine version as well, but of course the 179 was much more desirable. She's a bit punchier than the old grey motor, that's for sure. Extra cubic inches always helps in that department, but I'm sure these engines would have been thirstier when it came to fuel economy than the little grey. There's just something about the EH model. The design, the stance, the whole look and feel. It looks sharp. Holden got it absolutely 100% correct with this car. I think as I get older, I'm starting to mature and appreciate the earlier models so much more. Love the muscle cars and what have we, but it's good to mix it up a bit. There's nothing wrong with a good old classic. You don't have to have 400 horsepower to have fun. Well, I have to say I have really enjoyed this episode, and I cannot believe the amount of low mileage Holdens that Neil has here. It's an absolute credit to him. If you want to see some epic classic Holdens, get yourself down here to the Trafalgar Holden Museum. Trust me, it is well worth the visit. Thanks for watching, and we'd really appreciate it if you'd like and comment on this video. And be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notifications bell because there's a lot more content coming your way.